A few years ago, I was staying with my older brother on his farm, way out in the country. And late one night, I was walking around outside. I'd come back from something, and my niece was with me. And I love my brother's farm because there's no lights out in the country. It's very, very dark at night. And so what that means is as you look up into the sky at night, you have this incredible vision of stars, far more than you ever would if you were in town or certainly in a city. And I was marveling at the stars, and I made a comment to my niece. I said, "Do you see it? Do you see that bright white streak across the sky?" And she said, "Yeah, that's just a cloud." And I said, "No. You can see the galaxy. That's the Milky Way." It was so bright because the light on the farm was so low that you could even see the haze of our galaxy. And rarely are we ever able to see this. You have to go way out in the country where there's no light to be able to see the stars that clearly. I tell you this story because if you were listening to our first reading, this is precisely what God asked Abraham to do. God said to Abraham, "Abraham, go outside." Abraham is out in the countryside, living with his family, tending his flocks. He's an old man at this point, and especially for his age, somebody who was well into their 70s was incredibly ancient. So there he was, and God says to Abraham, "Go outside your tent, go and look up and count the stars." And he does. And God says to Abraham, "I make this promise to you. I will make of you descendants more numerous than all those stars that you see." Abraham believed. But there's two things that's amazing about this story. One is Abraham is well into his 70s and he has no children. The other thing that's amazing about this story is if you listen to the rest of the reading, God asks Abraham to prepare a sacrifice to symbolize the covenant, to express the new relationship that God and Abraham has. So he does that. He goes about and he prepares these animals and he gets them ready for the covenant. And then, listen to this. Earlier, God said to Abraham, "Go outside and look at the stars." And then a few sentences later, did you hear it? Did you notice how ridiculous this is? Because the reading then says, the sun went down. When God asked Abraham to leave his tent, look at the sky, and count the stars, it was the middle of the day. The sun was shining. There's no way Abraham could have seen those stars. But he still believed. He knew that the sun was blinding him, but behind the light of the brilliant sun, the stars still shone. And he knew the God who made the sun and the God who made the stars would be faithful to what he had promised, even though he could not see them. There's a word for this. Trust. Abraham trusted God, and God was faithful. Abraham couldn't see what God was promising. The sun was blinding his vision. It was far too bright for him to see the stars shining so brilliantly, so numerous. He couldn't see, but he knew and he believed. He refused to doubt God, and he placed his trust in God, and God was faithful. Even though Abraham was blinded and couldn't see. Now consider the gospel. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, as was their custom, and goes up a mountain to pray. While they're praying, a cloud covers the mountain, and they find themselves in murky darkness. The vision of Peter, James, and John was obscured. They saw Jesus brilliant, transformed, transfigured, shining as if he was some incredible, brilliant luminary. And with him, two others, Moses and Elijah. And they hear the voice of God saying the same thing that Abraham heard. This is my beloved Son. Listen to him. God the Father was saying to Peter, James, and John, trust him. Believe that what he says, because he's my son, because he is God, he is trustworthy. As Abraham trusted the voice of God, even though he was blinded by the brilliance of the sun, he still believed the stars were shining. Peter, James, and John were confronted, even though they could not see, because their sight was obscured by that dark cloud. They were still called by God to trust and listen to Jesus. We are called likewise. This is one of the themes of our discipline of Lent. As we wrestle with what Lent is about, as we try to grow closer to the Lord, one of the difficult things is coming to the point where we actually can trust God more. And I'll tell you what, it's not easy. It's very difficult to actually let go of our own will, hand it over to God, and believe that the promises which God made, even though it may be the sun shining and obscures our vision, or dark clouds come over us, and our life seems to be in a moment of darkness, wherever you find yourself, whatever's going on, if it's hard for you to see because something's too bright and blinding you, or there's a cloud covering you, and your eyesight is covered, trust God. He's faithful. He will follow through on the promises which he's made. And the difficulty is, I'm going to be honest with you, the difficulty is that as we go through our lives, especially those of you who are students, everything in your training, everything in your academic studies seems to indicate that you have to do it yourself. You are tasked with the responsibility to achieve all of the accomplishments that are possible. It's your own effort, your own talent, your own hard work, your own long nights, your own academic studies, rigor and effort. It's all on you, the world seems to say and encourage. And sometimes it's really hard to rely on other people, whether it's from a broken heart, broken relationships, broken promises, or maybe it's something as simple as you've done a group project before and the people in your project really didn't follow through with their job. Sometimes the life which we lead makes it difficult to trust others. And so, by extension, it becomes difficult to trust God because everything we're told is we can only rely on ourselves. Today, our readings challenge us to do exactly that, to trust God. To allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to allow ourselves to have that terrible moment of powerlessness where we actually believe that God is with us, God is for us, God is supporting us. And this is why St. Paul writes in the second reading, we heard him say, "My brothers and sisters, be imitators of me because we're trying to imitate Jesus." We can't do this alone. Trusting God on your own is brutally difficult. We need a community to do it. We need each other. We need those who are sitting with you, sitting next to you, behind you, and in front of you. I dare say you even need those who may not be here in this moment. If we're going to give ourselves to God, if we're going to take that little step and trust God, we can't do it alone. We have to imitate St. Paul and imitate others and allow others to support us. And then, when it's our turn, support others. Because everyone, no matter if you're in the brightness of day and you're having a wonderful moment in life, still the sun obscures your ability to see those stars. Maybe you're in a dark moment. Maybe you're in the midst of a cloud and your ability to see what God has promised is obscured. Wherever you are, in the broad daylight or in the darkness of a cloud over your life, we need to believe that God is trustworthy. And we need the support of others to help us trust him. Because as the voice said to Peter, James, and John, so the Father says to us. Jesus is my son. Listen to him.